Hi, everybody. How are you today? Thanks for joining us on our Facebook Live. We're here to talk all about yarn, which is great because this is a yarn store, so that works out perfectly for everybody. Before we get started talking about our yarn, I just want to update you on a couple of the things that are happening around the shop. We are getting ready to go back and have some open shop hours. We're very excited about welcoming you all back in the store and seeing our friendly faces, and not seeing our friendly faces, but seeing your friendly faces. Hopefully we'll be friendly faces, but we're not really going to be able to tell because we're going to be wearing masks, but we'll get to that in a minute. The shop is going to open this week on Thursday, and we'll be open Thursday and Friday and Saturday of this week. Our hours will be from 11 to 5. So that's a little bit different from what you're used to, but it's still something. We're going to be practicing all the social distancing guidelines that have been put into effect, including wearing a mask. If you would like to come into the shop, we would love to see you. We'll be wearing masks, and we would really encourage you to wear yours. Otherwise, you will not be able to come in and shop. That we're going to keep safety first. When you come into the store, we're going to have no more than 4 customers at a time in the shop. So if you're bringing 5 kids or your aunt, your uncle, and grandma and uncle and whatever, it's not going to work. The kids, the spouses, the whatever, they all count. So no more than 4 at a time. We'll have some socially distanced lines placed outside for you to wait, and a couple of chairs if you're lucky enough to be in the first or the second slot for coming in. We'll be wiping down everything once an hour. After everybody leaves, things will get wiped down, and then we'll do a little bit better cleaning once an hour and try to keep everything as clean and sanitized for you and for the people that work here, but still get back to the business of having some face-to-face time with you. Classes will not be resuming in the shop. They'll continue on Zoom. That's going really well. Chris is loving it. We're hearing some great feedback from her students. It's working wonderfully. You can check out the classes that we are offering and what's coming up. They're on our Facebook page, and let us know if you're interested in anything like that. Another big change that you're going to see in the store, at least for the foreseeable future, we will not be able to offer the community time that we have always had in the shop, where you come in and sit and knit and we talk and laugh and everybody, has a good time. We just can't do that right now because of social distancing. So there won't be any chairs in the shop. Don't think it's not because we do want you and we do miss you, but we just can't do that and keep everybody safe. So we encourage you to come in and shop, see what's new in the store. Things have been coming in. Things are a little slower than, shipments are a little slower than sometimes, but we have gotten some great new stuff in. Come in, see us, let us help you with any questions you have. If you have a quick little thing for us to look at that we can help you fix, we'll be happy to do that. But please don't plan on coming in and going to Basilico and having soup and sandwich and a nice afternoon at the shop. That will resume. We can't wait till it does, but right now we just can't offer that for our customers. So again, that's the newest thing this week with what is happening at the shop. And if you have any questions, just type them in there, and Shelly's at the other end of the computer, and she can feed them to me or she can answer them herself. So let us know how we can help you. In addition to the shop hours, you can still do online orders. Pam will be here. She's been doing a great job, Pam and Shelly, fielding your questions, your orders. That will still be available. We'll still bring you your stuff out to your car. If you're not comfortable coming in, we completely understand. Those services are still going on. So let us know if you need any other information about that. And now we'll get on to the topic of the day. We missed you last week. We're sorry that we didn't get together. I think Shelly pulled the Mother's Day raffle winners. Congratulations there. We have a raffle going on in our store. It's actually 3 raffles going on in our store right now. They're all from Rowan. They involve a Rowan yarn purchase of $50, get you in, and any Rowan yarn purchase. And there are 3 beautiful sweaters. We've got quite a few tickets in the jar, but there's 3 going out, and we would love to have your name on one of those. So if you're going to do a Rowan yarn purchase, make sure that you give us your information for your raffle tickets. Okay, so yarn. Most of my information today is going to be applying to both crocheting and knitting. As we all know, I am not a crocheter. My daughter is starting to learn how to crochet. Suzanne, our crochet teacher, is teaching her. She doesn't stop raving about Suzanne. It makes me feel kind of bad because I can't do it, but I guess that's what happens. So next week we're going to bring in Suzanne, and she and I are going to talk about knitting versus, not like we're having a fight about it, crocheting, and talk about the two different arts, and that will be fun to get some more crochet information into these Facebook Lives. But for today, most of the information applies to both. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do when we talk about yarn, here is our yarn, is talk about the actual physical makeup of the yarn. Most yarns are either animal-based or plant-based. So an animal-based yarn is what most of us think of as wool. That's the queen of the yarns, is a nice skein of wool, and that's what some people refer to yarn as, is I need to go out and get some more wool. We all know it's not all wool, but that's the one, that's the staple of this industry. Wool is a wonderful insulator. That's why people started to knit with wool, to keep them warm, and it has some great properties. It can hold a very nice stitch. You can see the texture. You can cable well with wool. Depending on what you're making, you can get a nice stretch and a good drape. Wool is a wonderful, wonderful fiber. In addition to wool, there are other animal fibers that we don't always think of. One of the things that's really popular right now is knitting with alpaca. Alpaca is a really fun animal. They're cute. And they have a property where there's no lanolin in their fur. And that's usually when people have wool allergies. It's the lanolin that they're allergic to. So when you knit with alpaca, you get some of the same texture as wool, but you don't have to worry about the allergies. Alpaca gives a much drapier, stretchier, loftier kind of feel to it, but it's still animal based. There are yak yarns and buffalo yarns, bison yarns. There's just all kinds of fiber that you can get from an animal. As long as there's a coat of fur that can be combed and spun, you can get an animal fiber. A popular thing right now is to take the fur from the undercoat of your dog and spin it. Or I'm not sure I'm into that, but some people are, and you get a beautiful animal-based product. In addition to the animal-based yarns, and we could talk about wool. That's a whole nother unit on itself, and maybe someday we will. But in addition to the wool yarns, we have the plant-based yarns. And the most popular plant-based yarn that we have is a cotton. Cotton is a great yarn for summer weight kind of garments or accessories. It isn't an insulator like an animal-based yarn would be. So you get a much lighter weight garment, much more circulation and airy, and kind of, that's why, we have our cotton yarns that we sell so much during the summer for great cotton sweaters. Cotton there's basically three different types of cotton. There's an Egyptian cotton, which uses a long fiber in it. There is an American cotton, which is a shorter fiber, tends to be a little fluffier, not quite as coarse. And then there's Pima cotton, which is a blend of both the Egyptian and the American cotton. And that's the cotton that really takes dye beautifully. Cotton yarn can come in so many different, beautiful, bright, vibrant colors. Kind of makes you think of the beach in summer, and it's fun. But the main difference is just the breathability and the light, airy texture that you get, not so dense, and it doesn't insulate. It won't keep you warm or cool. A wool sweater will keep you cool because if you start out cool, because it insulates your body from the warm air. So every one of the yarns that you buy has different ways to care for it. And we're going to talk about the care of yarn as soon as we get to talking about the bands. But before we talk about that, I want to talk to you about how your yarn actually comes. Yarn comes to you in 3 or 4 different formats. It comes in packaged like this. This is a skein of yarn, and it's ready to knit. Ready to go. You can take the band off. You can find an end from the outside. If you're adventuresome, you can go in and find your end somewhere there on the inside. Sometimes you have to dig around quite a bit. The benefit of going from the inside rather than the outside is if you go from the inside and you set your yarn on the table, you can pull from the inside and your yarn won't move. If you're pulling from the outside, your yarn flops all over, goes on the floor. You get a yarn ball, it'll stay in there. But the disadvantage of pulling from the inside is finding the inside. Anyway, it's ready to go. Another yarn that would be ready to go would be a yarn that comes shaped like this. Same thing. You can go from the inside, you can go from the outside, but it's ready to go. This is, some people will call this a skein. Some people will call this a cake. Then the one that always gets people is the yarn that comes to you like this. It looks like a really nice braid of some sort. This is a hank. And this is actually a nice way to buy your yarn because it's the least pressure on the yarn. There's no stretch here. It just stays, you know, it is a living thing. It does have a memory. It doesn't get stretched out when it's in this hank format. People come into the shop and they buy, you know, some hanks of yarn, and we always ask them, would you like us to wind this? And some people say yes. Some people say no, they'd rather wind it at home when it's time to use it. And some people don't know whether they want it wound or not. And those are the people that we really want to make sure understand you can't knit like this. You can take your band off and you can pull your braid out, but if you find the end and you start knitting, if it's not wound, it will get into a terrible mess. And that can be, if you're a beginning knitter and you didn't realize, that can be a really frustrating experience to have to go through. So when you purchase your yarn like this, if it's here, we'll always ask you if you want it to be wound. We enjoy winding yarn. If it's not here and you're someplace else and they don't ask you if you want it wound, you should ask for it wound. Unless, you know, you're one of the people, if you want to go home, drape it over the back of a chair and wind the ball yourself, that's fine. If you're going to wind it yourself, you always want to wind it very loosely. Some people think they want to get a nice, tight, hard ball. You don't. That stretches the yarn out. You want to keep nice, couple of fingers in between when you're winding, so it just makes a nice loose ball. So that's how your yarn can come to you. And remember, this is a disaster if you don't have it wound. Okay, now the yarn itself. The yarn comes in several different weights. There's different vocabulary that is closely related between weight and ply. We're going to talk about ply in a minute, but right now they're not synonymous. Well, some people think they are synonymous, but they really aren't. So we're going to talk about weights for your yarn. Your weight actually comes in 7 or more different categories. And if you get a band of yarn that has this little symbol on there, I don't know if you can see that or not, that will tell you what weight yarn it is. It's a little skein of yarn with a black band through it, and it has a number. And the numbers go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, not every yarn has that, but it's kind of convenient when it does. It takes all the guessing away. So if you get a yarn that has a 0 on it, that's a lace weight yarn. And lace weight yarns are great for so many things, including lace, obviously, but for other things also. If it doesn't have that little guy on there, no worries. You can still tell that it's lace weight yarn based on the size needle that they recommend with it. A lace weight yarn is usually knit with a size 0 to 2 needle. And when you knit it up, you usually get between 8 or 9 stitches to the inch. So one of those things is going to have to be on your yarn band, or else maybe the name of the yarn will say lace. All right. But some of them do and some of them don't. Everything is so different that you have to be, as a consumer, you have to know what to look for. So the little yarn guy is the easiest. But without that, you can go to the needle size that they recommend. You can go to the gauge that's on your band and look to see what's there. Also, you can look at the yardage. The yarn is usually sold in 100 grams or 50 grams. And if you are buying lace weight yarn, generally you're getting 600, 700 yards to the skein. Okay, you're not going to be able, you don't get that with worsted wool. It would be nice if you did, but it weighs more than the lace, so you don't get as much yardage. But that's lace. And those are the things to look for with lace. Now, one up from lace is fingering. Fingering weight yarn it's kind of my nemesis. I love a fingering weight yarn. That is a 1 if you've got your, like Barocco does a really nice job. They label them with that. So that's always fun to have all the guesswork taken out of it. People get confused between fingering weight and sock weight. And we often get, well, what's the difference between the two? As far as the size of the yarn goes, there is no difference. But sock yarn, here's some sock yarn. Sock yarn is a fingering weight. Most sock yarn is a fingering weight. You can make socks out of anything, but the socks that you normally see are fingering weight. But it has to have a nylon in there. It has to have an acrylic or a nylon or a polyamide in there to reinforce the strength. Otherwise, the heels and the toes and the bottom of your sock are just going to wear out. So when you're buying yarn to make a pair of socks, look very carefully on the content, what the content of your yarn is on your label, because you've got to have something in there to reinforce it. But as far as the weight goes, sock and fingering are the same. Now, fingering is generally knit with on any size needle from a 1 to a 3. You generally get about 6 to 7 inches to the stitch. Or sorry, that's not right. 6 or 7 stitches to the inch. And you get a lot on a skein. And fingering weight yarn tends to be the yarn that we all love to see, the one-of-a-kind designer yarns. They do a lot in fingering that is just so beautiful. We have some fingering weight yarn in the shop that is spectacular. But when you want to make a sweater with fingering weight yarn, it doesn't take a whole lot of skeins, but you're going to be knitting and knitting and knitting and knitting because it takes a lot of stitches to get an inch's worth of fabric. So there's always a trade-off. But fingering is fun to work with. One up from fingering is a sport weight yarn. I don't have a sport weight to show you right here, but it would have a 2 on that band if there was a number there. Sport weight is often what people refer to as baby yarn. We don't do that here at the shop. You can make anything, any yarn turn into baby yarn that you like. We go more on, the care, the ease of care, the comfort against a baby's skin, that kind of thing. But lots of times when we get somebody coming into the shop and they say, hey, I want some baby yarn, we often say, well, do you want the weight that's considered baby, or do you just want to make something for a baby? Because any yarn will work for a baby. A baby doesn't want to reject the gift just because it's not made out of sport weight yarn. But that's the weight for that. And again, you can look and see it's generally knit on a 3 to 5. You're going a few fewer stitches to make up your inch, about 5 to 6. And you still get a pretty good amount of yardage on a sport weight skein. After sport weight, we come up with DK. Now, DK is one of the most popular weights in yarn. It goes far. You get a lot of yardage. You have about 5 stitches to the inch. So that's not too bad. You generally knit DK on a size 5 to 7 needle. All that information is on this band here, and you can read about it. So even if this number 3 for DK was missing, you could read, oh, well, I see that I'm supposed to be knitting this on a size 5 needle, 5 to 6 needle. So that's in the DK range. And you would know, because it's very important that you know what kind of yarn you're supposed to use for a pattern so that you can substitute. And That's why we're going through a lot of this, is so you can make the appropriate yarn substitutions. So DK is next up. After DK, we have our worsted weight yarn. That would be like this. Worsted weight is a 4. Here's a hank of worsted. Must be liking the color gray today. We've got nice browns and grays and tans. They look so pretty. Worsted is probably in a close second with DK as far as what the most commonly used yarn. Lots of sweaters are made out of worsted. You get it's 4 to 5 stitches to an inch, so it's not an insurmountable thing. It's strong enough to hold a great cable, great stitch definition, really works nicely for anything. Blankets, you don't want to make a blanket out of lace weight yarn or fingering weight yarn. It would take you forever. This is tending to go a little quicker. After our worsted, we get into an Aran weight yarn, which would have a 4 on the back of it. I don't have an Aran right at my fingertips here, but maybe this might be an Aran. This is an Aran. This is an Aran that's made out of an acrylic. It's an acrylic yarn, so it's not plant-based, it's not animal-based, it's a synthetic fiber, but a great fiber nonetheless. And never let anybody tell you that you should never knit with acrylic yarn, because that's just not true. Every project has its own yarn that it'll work best with, and I work with acrylic yarn all the time for kids' projects. You can't hurt it. You can wash it, you can practically get, you could paint it and it would still come clean. Washing, drying, so there's always a place for acrylic yarn. There are better acrylic yarns than others, just like there are better wool yarns than others. But an acrylic or a synthetic based yarn is not like the devil. You should keep an open mind about things like this. But this is an Aran weight, a little heavier, not going to take you as many stitches to get across that nice back of that sweater as it would if you were doing a DK. And you're still going to get a nice looking stitch. It's still a wearable type garment. After our Aran, we get into the chunkies. The chunkies are a 5, and I do have a chunky here. This is nice because it not only does it have a 5 on the little yarn ball, it has the chunky in the name. So chunky is starting to get big. When you're getting into the chunkies, you need to make, or you don't need to do anything. It's recommended that you make something that doesn't have a huge amount of stitch definition, because it just takes up so much space that it starts to look, it doesn't work as well if it's a smaller weight yarn. But it's great for a blanket. It's great for a big wraparound Afghan and stockinette stitch. It's really a very usable yarn, and more designers are working with the chunky and the bulky yarn because customers like it because their projects go faster. So they're doing more. After the chunky, you get into a bulky, and we don't have a bulky. I don't have a bulky at my fingertips, but by the time you get up to bulky, you're on an 11 plus needle and your stitches are 3 to 4 to an inch. So instead of having to knit 8 stitches to get an inch, you can knit 3. That's getting big. And then the popular trend where you see on some of these sites where the huge jump. Sorry, we had a little technical glitch there. Sorry. That we don't sell jumbo yarn in the store, but I have a friend who's making a blanket using jumbo yarn, and she is loving it. But that's getting into huge needles. So those are the weights of yarn. Every project calls for a certain weight. If we have a yarn in the store that a project calls for, we can steer you right there to the aisle where it is. But if we don't, if we know it's a DK, if we know it's a cotton, if we know that you're supposed to get 6 stitches to the inch and the pattern calls that for you to be doing it on a size 6 needle, we can make lots of great yarn substitutions. But not every yarn will work for every project. You don't have to use the exact manufacturer's recommendation, but you should follow what their guidelines are. And again, that stuff is all on this label. This label is a really important tool for you to use when you're knitting. In addition to the knitting gauge, the crochet gauge is also there. Talk more about that next week. And the yardage is always on there, so you can see, oh, you know what? this shouldn't be a worsted weight yarn. It's 100 grams and I'm getting 900 yards. That's not worsted. You'll get familiar with how to read the band and making sure that you're making a good substitution for what you want. Also on here, on every yarn band is the care. And the care will tell you, it's nice. Barocco has really, I didn't realize how great their labels are. Barocco writes out in words how you're supposed to care versus some companies that use symbols. So the symbols on a yarn band can look like that. And they have an iron with a line through it. That means you can't iron it. If there's no line through it, it means you can. They have a hand going into a bucket of water. That means it's a hand wash. They have a dryer, and if there's no line through it, that means you can put it in the dryer. So the symbols take a little bit more deciphering, but they're universal, and you don't have to worry about a language barrier. So the yarn band is just absolutely critical for your knowledge of what you're using for what you're making and to get the end result of what you want. Now, in addition to the weight of a yarn, and we're not going to talk too long about this because this can get a whole 3-week class on this, we want to talk about ply. Ply is the number of strands, the number of single strands of yarn. When you spin a single strand of yarn. Any of you who are spinners out there know that's how it works, and that's how it works in manufacturing places. So you get a single strand of yarn. To take that single strand of yarn and make it into a heavier weight yarn, you take multiple strands and you twist them together. And that's what ply is. In some cases, not all cases, the more ply you have, the heavier your yarn is going to be. But we have some bulky yarns in here that are just 2-ply yarns because they're just almost roving that is wound together. So don't naturally assume that if you have a low number of plies, you have a skinny yarn. That's not true. And as you knit, this ply will start to become important to you because you get different characteristics with different ply. If you have, there's nothing, a 1-ply yarn is called a single ply. So if you have a single ply yarn, that it's nice, it's great yarn. Lots of yarns are single ply, but they tend to pill. Those are the yarns that you get those little bumps on that you have to get that shaver out and shave them off because they don't have any space between the fibers. It's just one single strand and it just rubs. But if you take that and one strand and you wrap it with another strand and you've got your ply going in 2 different directions, the rubbing doesn't cause so much friction. There's more space in between and you don't get as much pilling. The way the dye takes is different on your ply. The way your stitches hold is different on your ply. If you try to do a cable with a 2-ply yarn, it's usually not as crisp and as neat as if you do a cable with a higher ply yarn. It's fascinating. This stuff, you should look it up. I mean, it's really, really interesting. I had no idea that ply had such an effect with the final outcome of what you make. It's really, really interesting. So watch for ply. That is not usually on a label. You can take a strand of yarn and you can untwist it and you can see, you can just, I know from knitting with a lot of different yarns, I'm starting to see, oh yeah, this is a 3-ply yarn because look at how nice my texture is, how my cables are standing out better, that kind of thing. So all of that has a big effect on how your final outcome looks. Now, in addition to the weight and the everything else here, we want to talk about how yarns are colored. All right? These yarns that I've been holding up here for you are all standard manufactured yarns. They're great yarns. They're wonderful, but if we run out of this color of Barocco Ultra wool, which we do quite often because people love to make sweaters out of this, including me, we can order it and we can get it again. And there may be a slight variation in the dye lot. The dye lot is always on the tag. That's something that you can look for. Some people will come in, they'll want to make a sweater. We'll have 6 balls of this and maybe they'll need 8. They'll want to wait and get all 8 out of the same dye lot. Some people want to get started. They'll take a risk and hope that it's close enough. And generally, yarn that's manufactured like this is close enough. Sometimes it's exact. Sometimes you can't tell any difference. But it is something that's good to check. Versus something like this, which is stunningly gorgeous. This is a hand-dyed yarn. And the artist here that did this is probably going to do another batch of this someday. And it's not going to look anything like this. So with a hand-dyed like this, I always feel badly when somebody has made this beautiful sweater and they need another 3 inches and we can try to get this again, but it won't look the same. Lots of times when you have hand-dyed yarns, because each skein is so, they're the same colors with the same dye, but they look different, we'll tell people to work with 2 skeins at a time. So you knit 1 row and come back in a purl, and then you knit the next row and the next one. So you can't see the chunks of where you've changed your yarn. So there's 2 different things to be concerned about. And I'm sure as you're getting into this, and some of us who are into this big time, we have a huge stash of yarn, because that's behind every great knitter is a great stash. This is the kind of yarn you tend to stash because you can't get it again. You buy this, you think, I might not use it for 2 years, but I'm going to have it. This kind of yarn you buy in quantity when you want to do your project, but you don't generally stash 7 or 8 balls of this. It's more this fancy stuff, which you can't get from the independent dyer again. So these are solid yarns that these manufacturers are putting out. This is an indie dye, and it's really pretty. This is a tonal yarn. It's all the same color. Sometimes there's different fibers. The fibers are blended differently. If you put a silk in with a wool, the silk will take the dye differently. So while it's all the same color, it's different tones of that color. You get a little bit of a shadow here and a light spot over there. That's kind of nice. We sell a lot of tonal yarns where people don't want the flatness of a solid. They want a little bit more depth. And then you have the yarns like I just held up. These are more of a variegated yarn where you're going to get lots of different colors in your skein, and it's going to be fun to see how they come together. And sometimes they pool and you'll get all kinds in one space and you won't like that and you'll start it off differently. Then this yarn, you can't really tell from the yarn itself, but if you look at what it makes those cool striped socks. This is a self-striping yarn where through the magic of something, and I don't understand it, you get these great stripes, and your socks will have cool stripes. Or if you make this into a sweater, you'll have like this kind of faux Fair Isle pattern. It's very, very neat. So make sure if your pattern is calling for a variegated yarn, you know what you're after. All right. And if it's calling for a self-striping yarn, you can go and you can either look at the yarn and see that you're going to get these stripes. Some people call this yarn a gradient, where it starts, it would start with one color in the bottom and blend into maybe 3 or 4 colors throughout the whole skein. That's self-striping, but the stripes are huge, so it kind of like gradiates through the whole thing. These are very narrow stripes that you would be getting on your socks. So there's so many different things out there about yarn, and it's so cool, and it's just fun. And I've been talking for a half hour. I feel like I just talk way too much, but that's our yarn for today. And we have not even gotten into the different types of yarn where you have like all kinds of fancy metallics and chain stitched yarns and the different things like that. There's lots more to talk about, and perhaps we'll do a yarn part 2 coming up in the future. So I really appreciate you I'm loving your comments. I have to go home and read them because I would have to put my glasses on and then I'd be too busy reading and I wouldn't be able to talk. But I read them all the time. I love them. I think it's so much fun. Next week, there's going to be 2 of us here, and we'll be doing the knitting versus the crocheting. So if you are been a crocheter and you've hung on with us and don't feel like you've kind of gotten your shot, next week is your week. We'll make sure that we address anything that you want to know about. And if you have any questions that you want us to ask, you can email them earlier in the week, and we'll certainly look up and figure out the answers to your questions. Again, be mindful of the shop changes, the hours now. We are looking forward so much to seeing you. Please do not be offended when we ask you to wear a mask. I know that a lot of people don't feel that is something that they're comfortable with, and that's absolutely fine. But for those people that really, really need it, we're going to ask everybody do it. If you don't want to wear a mask, we would be happy to deliver stuff to your car or set up a private appointment with you. That's absolutely fine. We want to be respectful of everybody's wishes. So looks like we're coming out of some of these strange times. Everybody should do it safely and carefully so that we can all get together and sit and knit soon. I think we're going to have a nice reunion when we can get back face to face, all in the same room, sitting around our table here at Untangled Pearls, and we'll have some great stories to tell each other, and that will be fun. So we'll see everybody next week. Thanks for the great comments. Thanks for watching, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. It's so much fun. I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. I don't know how to end it. How do you end it?
At the bottom, isn't there an end?
I can't see. Finish.